Hello, Rachel.
Hello, Ryan.
How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm feeling like my mind is going to have a quake. That's how I'm feeling. I'm feeling like I could see everything. I feel like I'm about to become. That's how I'm feeling. How are you feeling?
At one with the energy in the world.
At one with the energy in the world. Now, Rachel, we're YumYumPodcast because of that iconic line of dialogue, Yum Yum from Star Trek Discovery's second season. A line of dialogue...
Commander Nandi gave us so much and so little.
Yeah, so much and so little. We had to name our show after it. We used to cover Discovery, but now we're covering the 1990 series Babylon 5, one episode at a time from a rewatch point of view. So that does mean spoilers, people. You've been warned, people. You've been warned, okay? Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty, I want to ask you. We watched episode 6, Mind War. Who is the character in this episode most likely to have said yum yum?
Oh.
It's a tough question, I know.
Well, there's no McGrath.
There's no big bug gangster guy. Yeah, you're right. We don't have him to say it.
And it's not Jakar's vibe this episode.
He has a vibe.
He does, but it's not a yum yum energy kind of vibe.
Who's got the?
Episode.
Is it Bester?
I think it might be Bester or his companion.
May I put forward a bold one?
Mm-hmm.
My yum yum candidate is Catherine Sakai's impression of Jakar. That's who my candidate is. Her impression of doing Jakar's voice. She, doing that voice, would say yum yum.
Sigma 957 is not a healthy place. Strange things happen there. Right.
But, Rachel, have you ever wondered what it would be like if two podcasts made love?
Oh, I think it's just the only time in a podcaster's life.
Where the souls merge together, become one, and the voices are kept out, the voices of the listeners out there.
Because we have had that experience on Yum Yum Trek.
Yeah, so we are actually joined by some fellow podcasters for this one. We are joined by the Continuum Drag Podcast. Hello, fellas.
Hey there.
Hello.
Hey, I have a point to make. You said, what would it be like if two podcasts made love? I think it would be exactly like in Planet of the Apes when a human kisses an ape. That's exactly what it's like.
You're sensual.
It's a little bit unpleasant, but you might be a little bit turned on too.
Yeah, and you want to figure out what the mechanics of it all would be like? Yeah. So, guys...
I think we can all figure out the mechanics.
Well, I'm thinking about the mechanics now.
There are some differences between apes and man.
Oh, it's more compatible than Centauri and human.
That is true. So, guys, please introduce yourselves. Tell us who is who and what you do on your podcast.
I'm Luke. That's Jordan. On our podcast, I'm the leader. Jordan's some sort of sidekick, I believe
he's
is how it
Batman,
works.
I'm Robin.
No, our podcast is also science fiction based, but I don't know. We dig into shows we've never really heard of. I believe we call it forgotten and underappreciated science fiction. But mostly we just pick shows at random and often with no pre-warning as to what's going to be going on.
So what are some examples of some classic forgotten sci-fi gems that you guys have covered on the show?
I don't know if they would call many of them gems, though.
Hey, let them decide that.
By the way, you've just thrown me into a horrible stress situation because I can't think of one show now. As often happens, I have the worst memory. So I'm like, what did I watch?
We've discussed 3 of them already.
Yeah. What did we watch? There was
We talked about them off air, but they're gone already.
There's
You got Planet of the Apes show.
Yeah, Planet of the Apes. That was a show.
Tech War.
Yeah, Tech War. That was one. I like that you know them better than I do. Yeah, Star Cops. That was in there.
Earth 2, I think.
Yep. Oh man, you really know them.
But Ryan, how did you discover the podcast, Ryan?
Yeah. What was the vampire one? That was one.
I love there's no answer for that either. What's the vampire one? Nobody knows.
I'm trying to think of it, but it's gone.
It's like light time.
Ultraviolet.
Ultraviolet. I was close.
Light Time, my
I don't
favorite vampire show. So I found you guys because I was in the hankering to listen to somebody talk about a singular episode of a TV show that I like, which was I wanted to hear someone talk about the episode Ray Butts of Space Above and Beyond. To me, I think one of the quintessential this should not have been cancelled sci-fi shows. The Firefly before Firefly, also on Fox as well. So I was really in the hankering for some Space and above and beyond content, and I was looking around being like, where are all the podcasts? I'm not seeing any that cover this show. This is it's not the most well-known show, but it does definitely have a cult following, and I was surprised by not being able to find any breakdown, like any episode by episode kind of stuff, anything that you guys are currently doing and that we do for this, not enough Space Above and Beyond. And I found you guys, I found your show, and I went, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to just listen to the whatever ones they've got for the Ray Butts episode, and I really enjoyed it, and I went back and listened to the whole entire journey you had with that television show, and then I was looking through all of these shows you guys have covered. I'm like, I don't know most of these things, and I thought I knew science fiction shit. So
did we when we started.
I think it's impossible to know the ocean that is science fiction, though.
Oh, yes, and we are diving into a big ocean with Babylon 5, Episode 6, Mind War. But of course, I want to hear from you two what your relationship and history has been with Babylon 5, because as you said, you guys cover all of these sci-fi shows, and I would imagine that Babylon 5, the name of it, or even the name of its spin-off series, Crusade, has popped up time and time again. But do you guys have a history with it? Have you watched it before? Let us know.
Luke, do you want to mention our connection to Babylon 5?
Sure. Well, sure. Why don't I start us off?
What a lead! Huh?
I never watched it when it was on air, but obviously I knew about it at the time. Like, it was a very big. It was certainly in the air when I was that age, getting into science fiction. And when we started our podcast, it originally was going to be a Babylon 5 podcast.
Do you remember the pun? What our pun title was, Luke?
I do. I thought about it this morning. It was going to be called Babble on 5.
I mean, that's your money right there, right? We barely had to do any work after that.
I think there's a podcast called like the Babble On Project. They stole your pun.
I'm calling my lawyer right now.
So have you guys watched it? Like, so you guys knew of it, but you hadn't watched it, and you were planning to cover it yourselves on the show as like a first-time viewing type of deal? Or
yeah,
what?
That was originally the plan, but we couldn't bring ourselves to commit to the amount of episodes there were.
110, yeah.
And then I think what we did poke around a little and see that there were a few other people who were in the middle of a few Babylon 5 projects, and we're like, well, let's maybe let them do it. They might be better than us. We don't know what we're doing yet. So we went with Tech War for the first one, and it was
what an alternative.
Right. We were right. We weren't very good at it, but
I think we also had that conversation of like, what sick people would watch every episode of Babylon 5 and then record a podcast on it. And I thought, never. Who would do that?
Oopsie.
Oh, I think I'm in love.
Let's hear the episode summary. Which one of you two is going to read us what the DVD's summary of this episode is?
I won the rock, paper, scissors, so I got to do it.
Okay, hit us with it.
Oh, I don't know how you guys do it, so I'm going to do it like how I always do. Here is the DVD summary for episode 6, Mind War. Sinclair's position on Psy-Cops is perfectly clear. Get out of my head, he orders. This is great. I love this so far. But getting Bester, bracket, Walter, how do you pronounce his name? Koenig? Koenig. Walter Koenig, end bracket, and his fellow mind-reading officer off the station. Out of the station? Out of the station is another matter. They're on the thought trail of what they say is a rogue telepath with some awesome telekinetic powers.
So, that is Mind War's summary according to the DVD. Now, let's dive into our history and relationship with this episode, Rachel. We watched this one when you were first watching Babylon 5. You had watched a handful of them on your own, but I distinctively remember watching this episode with you. This was definitely one of the first ones. And I remember you were keen because you, at that point, were a big Talia Winters fan. You were a big fan of the psychics aspect of the show, the telepathic aspect.
I was intrigued.
You were intrigued, but this is the first big, here's an episode for you about them. Here you go. Watch this. So what was your relationship with this one?
I remember feeling a lot of pressure to like Bester because, again, this was early on in our relationship and it was another test. Being like, you better fucking like this dude.
Yeah.
Like, he's an awful human being.
Yeah, you better like Bester.
But you better like him. And I remember thinking, like, it's good. It's an interesting idea, and then he turned into like a nebula at the end, and I was just like, what the
Jason
fuck?
Ironheart, yeah.
I was like, what the fuck is this? This doesn't feel like anything else that's happened in this show so far.
He became. That's what happened. So
Yeah.
I have always had a tricky relationship with this episode because it introduces Mr. Bester, played by Chekhov himself, and he will become a recurring villain character, and I love that character. And I love the Cyclops, but I've always had a tricky relationship with this particular episode because Talia Winters is my least favorite character in this era of the show. And so whenever I would watch it as a young child, I'd be like, it's the boring...
Talia.
It's like when you watch a Deanna Troi episode. You go, oh, fuck, we're going to be in a boring episode, are we? Okay, here we go.
Can I hear that noise again that you did when you saw her on the screen? That's all right.
So I thought when I was watching this many times, this episode's bland. I don't really care for it. It's following Talia, who I really don't have an opinion on strongly. I just don't like her very much because I was so used to Star Trek's bad female-centric episodes being like, and the lady has a former lover on the ship, which this episode does do. It's like, and the lady has a former lover who's like...
Or will get sexually assaulted.
This is like that episode
The only two
of
things someone from the 90s is allowed to give a female character.
Yeah, this is like that Crusher episode. I was like, this is like that Crusher episode where she falls in love with the... where she
her
falls in love with the
grandma's
ghost?
diary.
No, the one where she falls in love with the guy who becomes a ball of energy at the end. That's what I was like, oh, this is like this. So I always was very dismissive of this, but over the years of rewatches, I've grown to appreciate what this episode is trying to do. It's trying to do a lot of things, and I've appreciated Talia Winters as a character a little bit more because I kind of understand on the grander scheme of this roster of characters what she's supposed to be and what her arc is, but I still struggle with this one, but I did like it a lot more on this rewatch. I feel like this was one of the more well-defined episodes from a writing and structure perspective that Babylon 5 has had thus far. I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but I felt like all the actors were the characters that I know them to be, more so than in the early episodes where they're still trying to figure it out, as well as the writing is still trying to figure it out. There's still obviously room for improvement, but I was like, okay, Jakar is the Jakar I know, Sinclair's the Sinclair I know, that type of deal. So, Continuum Drag people, I heard that one of you at least just watched this episode on its own. Is that the case?
I only watched this on my... Yeah, both of us, yeah.
Oh boy. So,
It's
how
good.
was
It's good
that?
because I have questions, which is important.
Good, because I gave you guys some warm-up time. I was like, you guys can check out a few of the episodes beforehand if you need, because there's going to be that thing where it's just like, here's a bunch of people and a bunch of lore that you should care about. But I chose you guys for this episode because I felt like the premise of this episode would be a television show that would exist that you guys would cover. And because of the Star Trek actor involved and how different his character is to the one we know him for in Star Trek. So, Luke, tell us what it was like for you watching this episode of Babylon 5.
I mean, first of all, I was very disappointed that bald guy with the big hair wasn't in it, because that's the only character I really recognize from Babylon 5.
Londo, yeah.
I was just like, where's that guy? That's the one I wanted to see. But I will say, I definitely enjoyed it. It's like it definitely feels like something we would watch, like, but probably a little better put together than the shows we normally watch for sure. Gakar, how do you say it? Gakar?
Jakar.
Jakar, thank you. I really liked him. I was just like, oh, this is just Babylon 5's Garrick. I'm on board with this guy.
Yeah.
Do you recognize him from Star Trek?
No, should I have?
He's Tomalok, the main Romulan that they face off against in TNG.
Oh, I mean, it's so hard under all that makeup, but he did a great job. Like the makeup's great in it. It's very funny. It's very specific to its era. Like you've talked about Space Above and Beyond already, but it's like got Space Above and Beyond effects, that sort of PlayStation 1 polygon version of special effects, which it's unfortunate. I get why they had to do it for budgetary reasons, but it's so tough to go back and watch those shows when you have to sort of struggle through those effects, because like the alien effects are really good. Even watching the like opening credits, like that bug monster that popped up, I'm like, oh, I want to see that. I was just like, that's cool. And honestly, here's the one thing. I was watching, I'm like, this is why I didn't watch the show when it was on television. Is the only real issue with this show is the lighting direction.
Ooh,
only they had a different lighting director.
Well, there's a lot of production stuff in season 1 when it comes to the lighting and specifics. They had a specific director who was very much known for doing crime shows, so he kind of liked that lighting. And I will say, lighting-wise, this episode has always been a buggy one for me because it feels so grey when the show usually has more of a colourful palette to it, to me. But I also kind of understand because this episode's so fucking oppressive. Like, this isn't necessarily like a happy-go-lucky episode. Like, this isn't like funny. It has its light moments, but this is like 2 Nazi officers come onto the ship type of episode. Jordan, what was it like for you coming into this episode?
Well, it's interesting you kind of mentioned the lack of humor. It was something I was surprised at, and I wasn't sure. Again, this is the only episode of Babylon 5 I've seen, if that was indicative of the series as a whole, because it seemed like there was a sort of lack of humor. I was like, there's no one in the ship that is having a good time? No one's enjoying themselves? Everyone's very angry and stressed out?
Garibaldi was horny in the elevator. That was pretty funny.
That's true. That's true. Yeah,
More like Garibalding.
Yeah.
I was actually going to say, I don't know the show. How long does it take? I'm only guessing. How many seasons did it take until he shaved his head? Does he shave his head?
Season 5.
There you go. You knew it was going to happen.
That actor had a funny thing where he was a bit of a dickhead in real life, like a funny guy. Each season, they told him, do not cut your hair. We need it for continuity's sake. So he would get a different haircut at the start of every season just to fuck with him. So,
okay, I like that.
So by the end, he was like, I'm just shaving it. so just to mess with him. And he was going bald anyway. But no, it's not indicative of the show. There is humor throughout. Like there's been some very funny episodes, but you will get episodes like this in which there's more of a dark atmosphere, especially with the telepath character-based stories, because the telepaths are kind of fucked up and scary. So you guys have been kind of talking about like, yeah, you didn't really know what the show, like you didn't really know, you haven't watched the show, and you kind of knew it was like a DS9 kind of comparison piece of like, oh, this character's like this, and you know, it's a space station where they're pretty much the UN in space type of deal. But when you did watch this episode and it presented itself, what was your overall feelings on it?
I mean, this has lots of stuff I like in a show. I'll admit, you're right, there was not a lot of humor. That often doesn't bother me. I can just get through something that's very dour. Like, when it started and they're like, I believe it's the commander was just talking about, he's like, he's got to go deal with the unions and the megacorps. I'm like, all right, the show's for me. If you're going to be dealing with unions and megacorps, I'm on board.
I did have a chuckle at when she was just like, I'm going to do this business. And he's just like, really? You're going to deal with a megacorp? Like, that line makes me chuckle because it's just so offhanded.
It feels like there's a lot of like backstory, and like it feels like the lore is pretty deep, which is something that I can just like sign on board to really quickly.
You know, it's funny that Luke, you mentioned sort of the lore and all that, because when I was watching this, I was thinking this is a show up Luke's alley. It's more of a Luke show than it's a Jordan show, if there's such a thing. I mean, the little things I picked out, my notes are like, haha, look how funny that guy's shirt is. You know, I'm looking for funny glasses that people are holding, and I'm funny shirts, and like I just wanted more Jakar. I'm like Jakar, and then he's like, where did he go? Oh no, I have to listen to this lady having psychic sex with this guy for some reason. You know,
Yeah, that's understandable. So
I did like though that part though in the episode where she and I guess this is not a spoiler. The show's been done for 30 years, but I like when she's like, yeah. Anyways, I used to have a relationship with a guy. Anyways, let me tell you about how good the sex was. I was like, no one asked you, lady. She's like, no, it was really good. It's psychic sex. So step one, you get to be psychic. Or like, all right, okay, we get it.
Do you know what it's like when telepaths make love, Commander? You drop every defense. And it's all mirrors reflecting each other's feelings. Deeper and deeper.
So let's go to, before we dive fully into that A plot, let's go over to that B plot, because it seems like our two over here have a fascination with the one alien character we really get in this episode, which is Jakar. So the B plot is relatively simple. Commander Sinclair's girlfriend, who has been in a previous episode, the last episode she was in, she is on the ship. She's doing business. She's does planetary surveys for different corporations, and she's been inquired to do this special survey for this special planet in a contested area of space. And we learn why it's contested as the episode goes along. And I want to say, from our previous episode discussion, Rachel, Catherine Sakai has majorly improved as a character.
Oh, yeah.
Instantly, because she's not saddled with her, hello, I'm new to the ship and I'm a former lover. In this, she gets to be her own character. She has her own wants, needs, and desires, and she has her own character fault.
Yeah.
Her own ego gets in
Yeah.
the way of things.
And I do feel like the actress has got a better feel for the character.
She felt more natural in this
Yeah.
episode because...
And it didn't feel as stilted with her and Sinclair.
Oh,
I
thought...
just want to be clear. This is the better version of her as a character.
Yeah.
Better. Like, she's still finding her feet, but the previous version,
It's not good, but it's better.
I don't think she was bad. For what this role is,
But would you say that it's good?
I would say it's good. Like, not the
Okay.
greatest performance in the show, but like, I bought her as Sinclair's girlfriend of a long period of time. They're in that period of relationship at the very big. I like their little back and forth at the beginning, in which she's talking about how she's going to be doing her business, he's going to be doing his. I like the fact that they're a mature couple, in which it's not like, you're commander of the space station, yet you don't make time for me, your girl. I like the fact that she has her own agendas, like she's got her own things. I like that they're both independent people, and I thought her performance was relatively strong.
I was grateful when it started off with her and the commander. I thought for sure this was going to be too much focused on that relationship, which I just did. I was like, I don't like where this is going. I don't think I'm into it. But when she sort of split off into her own story, I'll admit, maybe not the strongest actress at the moment. Her Jakar impression could use a little work.
No, I loved it because she's the only character bold enough to try.
But I thought it was good. When they split off and gave her own like subplot, I was like, oh great, because I really was like cringing at the idea I was going to have to watch an episode of her being like the commander's girlfriend, and I didn't have to get it. So
I like Catherine Sakai here, and I think what makes her work too in this episode is, performance-wise, she has to go up against probably one of the best performers in the show, which is Jakar. And I think that she does a good enough job, not the greatest job, but she does a good enough job, and the writing does a good enough job of having her counter him and not be trusting of him, because it's like, he's this weirdo alien who has his own political agendas. I don't trust a thing he has to say. And seeing those two back and forth together was probably some of my favorite stuff in the episode. What about Jakar and the Catherine Sakai side of the story drew you guys in?
I agree with you that them working to, like, when Jakar acts against her, I think the actor playing Jakar is quite strong, and he's clearly elevating everyone's performance around him, because she does get better when she's performing with him 100%. And it's a pretty basic plot line. She wants to go to this planet, get this minerals. He says, hey, be careful. And then he'll kind of like send someone out to keep track of her. It's a pretty simple plot line. But, and maybe I'm crazy here, I think this should have been the A plot, because when she gets there and like a flower blooms on the planet and then flies into space,
and it fucks her up.
It's just so crazy. And they end it with him just saying, it's like, there are just like beings out there that like view, like they're like ants to us, like or we're like ants to them. Like there's this like concept they introduce right at the end that I'm just like, no. This is an interesting concept. This should be an episode. Like you dedicated far too little.
Is.
No, but this is the show saying, no. This is going to be a series-long thing, buddy.
Yeah.
We're not going to just regulate this to one episode because we are more invested in it than just that.
Well, that was going to be my question. Do those super aliens come back?
They come back.
Aliens come back.
And that overall concept comes back of... There are beings, there are entities out there, billions, millions of years older than us, and they look at us like we are just mere ants. They have no interest in us because they are so evolved, so advanced, so beyond our beings.
You can just, like, stay out of the way or get trampled.
Get trampled on.
That's a great concept. That's a great sci-fi concept. I was really into it. Also, side note, I don't think there should be ants on your space station. When he pointed to the ants crawling around on a flower, I was very worried. I'm like, there shouldn't be like ants crawling around on your space station.
But Catherine points out that like you can't always keep them out.
Yeah, just trade. There's going to be stuff that gets on places, and I like that detail. See, Babylon 5 is really good with nitty-gritty little details like that you would think about. Like, okay, if there's a space station, blah, 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 would there be like animals or things that would get into the cargo and that would get onto the ship? And even a touch that I really appreciate that I never really thought about before, which is when Captain Sakai's ship gets blasted and she's running out of energy and she's descending into the atmosphere. I like that they put the detail that the heat is getting on the hull of the ship and she's like sweating profusely.
Yeah.
She could have actually probably died from the heat of re-entry rather than just like crashing onto the planet, which most sci-fi shows don't always do.
She would die before the ship burn up.
Yeah, and it's like clear.
She would get boiled alive.
And it's making it clear that ship isn't one that goes like on and off a planet. Like that's only for space travel. You don't like land that on a planet necessarily. Especially if your power's fucked. But I like it has these little details about that. And of course, you guys did mention Jakar's makeup design and his overall outfit is very alluring, wouldn't you say?
I like the way, and I like the way he looks, and I'm a fan of the actor. I think mostly because he was in The Fugitive playing the one-armed man, and I love that movie, and I think he's great in that. So and yes, I remember him from Star Trek as well. He's just one of those good character actors that just are great, even if you put 10 pounds of makeup on his head. I, though, kind of was hoping that she was going to go out there and they weren't going to rescue her in time. Like, she was going to boil in the thing. And then he was going to have to be, like, pulling his collar and be like, ooh, I guess I should have sent the guys 5 minutes earlier. But unfortunately, she did survive.
There was no profit, no advantage in letting you fall to an untimely and most uncomfortable death. It would distress the commander to no good effect. So once again, we return to why not?
What was your viewpoint of like, what did you think this story was going to lead to? Like, here's the pitch: don't go to this planet. I will go to this planet. Where did you think it was going to go?
Oh, I mean, I saw Jakar saving her for brownie points a mile away.
Before he called his government to get the ship sent out, did you call it?
Yeah, because I got the sense off of the character right away that, like, yes, her reaction to him was that, like, I don't know if you can trust these people. We've been at war with them, but I just got the sense right away. I'm like, this guy's a good guy. He's not gonna let her get hurt. I thought he might go out there himself and take care of it, but he called in some reinforcements.
I wasn't quite sure if it was going to be one of those things where it was, and I hate to invoke Deep Space Nine, but as a comparative show at the same time, it's sort of a Quark-esque character of the reason he doesn't want her to go out there is because he's got some sort of side hustle going on and doesn't want her to discover it. I wasn't quite sure if that's where they're going because he's clearly a very different character. It's not this sort of I don't know what you call
greed-filled
character. Exactly. He's clearly something else, but only seeing this episode, I wasn't sure where they were going with him. But I was like, well, maybe that, but no space flower.
No, you didn't guess giant space tree, Christmas tree coming out and fucking her up real good?
Was not on my bingo card.
Best effect of the show, though. I really like that effect.
I really like that spaceship design. It's one of my favorites in the show. I really like how it is just one of those, that's alien. That's alien. That's bizarre.
Yeah.
That's weird.
That's
I like her was just taken aback, being like, what am I seeing here?
What am I doing? Yeah, the thing about Jakar is, up until this point in the show, he's been the antagonist in the show because he's really not interested in peace. He's not interested in the mission statement of Babylon 5. He has a blood-feuding relationship with another character because his people were oppressed. If anything, Jakar is kind of similar to Major Kira in a lot of ways in this comparison piece.
Yeah, interesting.
In which we were the formerly oppressed people, and now one of the the race of our oppressors are actually like diplomats on the ship. That's kind of like a difference. And he's been very nefarious. He's been very untrustworthy. And this is kind of a turning point for his character because he says it at the end. There was nothing to gain. Like, there's no political move, there's no power move there to be done. Why would I let you die? You haven't done anything.
It seemed like a good idea at the time.
And there's this recurring note of people assuming, because she's the girlfriend of the commander. Oh, make sure not to tell the commander about this business deal. Oh, make sure because you're the commander's girlfriend. And Jakar doesn't play that card here. He's like, oh, it will be upsetting for the commander if you died, but overall, I cared because you're an innocent person. You haven't done anything wrong. I'm trying to warn you sincerely about an issue, and you're not taking me seriously because you assume I have some political hustle here to maneuver, but really I don't. And I find it interesting that one of you guys said that he did this for kind of the brownie points. I don't know if I necessarily agree that he did it for the brownie points. I genuinely think that he just has a moral center to him where it's just like there's nothing to gain in the death of an innocent person.
I also think that he just wanted to prove his point as well, that like nobody on the station is what they appear, because he says that like if I did that, great.
Yeah, it would feed into this ongoing narrative that, we are just how we appear to be. Like, I'm a politician, and I have to put up this front for my people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm an evil man. I just want my people to get their rights, and if I have to use violence to do that, then sure, but, killing, letting you get killed, who does that serve? That serves no one. And I think that's an interesting kind of nugget to put into a character that has otherwise been amoral and antagonistic throughout the whole entire run of the show, because it makes it that this character isn't just a two-dimensional bad guy. It gives them an extra layer. It gives them some capacity for there to be a good within them, and it makes it more enjoyable to watch rather than he's just a mustache-twirling bad guy who does bad for bad's sake, because oftentimes, especially if you're going to have that as a series regular character, that can get a little tiresome after a certain point of, they're just going to do the bad thing because they're bad. Here, he takes a moment aside and says, no, I'm going to do the good thing. I'm going to send people out and save you, because who wants to die from an ancient alien race stepping on you like you are just a mere ant? Rachel, we get that conversation at the end between Jakar and Sakai, in which he talks about basically saying that thing is a mystery, and that's a thing that we may never get an answer to. He is saying, I am reassured to know that there are some things that have yet to be explained. When you watched this episode the first time, what was your reaction to the show basically saying to you, see that weird thing? We may never explain that because that's the point.
Yeah, I was pissed off like Jordan and Luke were. It's just like, what the fuck?
But
I don't know where this is going, but I wanted an answer, and you're deliberately telling me that I'm not getting an answer?
And did you think...
Screw you!
But did you think that you were ever going to actually get an answer in spite of that statement?
Oh, I did because you told me.
You did that thing where it's like, please tell me, do we see the tree again? I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
Listen, Rachel, this is my exact reaction when I finished it. I'm like, they better fucking come back, because if it doesn't, I'm very annoyed.
You have to wait for 2-3 seasons, but they'll come back. And like that's it. That's like it's very patient, this show, and like that episode, like that B plot's plotting is very patiently done. Like every now and then we'll cut back to it, and I think they cut back to it at the right moment of tension in the A plot. Like when they cut back to her scenes, I didn't necessarily have that groaning sensation like in previous episodes of like, oh, why are we cutting away from the action
Has
here?
much better pacing than previous episodes have had.
And I think, and you guys can all comment on this if you like, but like I think it ties into one of the main themes of the episode, which is, don't mess with things that are bigger than you. Just accept your place in a way. Like, don't overreach for things, because that's kind of what Jakar's touching on at the end. Is like, there are things out there that are just beyond comprehension, and we should just be reassured by that. And in the A plot, Jason Ironheart saying kind of the same thing. We've gone too far with telepathic ability. We've gone beyond, and now look at me. I'm becoming the iconic I'm becoming. What do you guys think of that, and how the B plot mirrors the A plot in any way? Like, because I imagine when you guys cover shows, you're going to have some with A's and B plots, and sometimes in these sci-fi shows like Star Trek, you just have a random B plot in there, and you're like, what's this doing here? How did you guys feel about the tying together of these two plots thematically or story-wise?
Listening to you talk about it, I can see the connection now. I don't know if I did when I watched the episode. Like, I can see there's this theme that runs through the unknown, and what we should be doing or should not be doing in terms of dealing with each other, dealing with the universe, or so forth. But I don't know if I felt that when I was watching the episode. Maybe just because I was trying to track, characters, and again, I was very worried about the shortage of Q40, if I haven't mentioned that. And so I think just because there was so much coming, it's funny when you watch these sort of episodes, and we said, on our podcast, we watch, a season of a show, or as far as we can get, and sometimes before we just can't take anymore. There's an interesting idea or feeling of watching a show when you haven't seen the episodes before, and you may not see the episodes that come after. And I like thinking about what a viewer would have been like in maybe 1993, like if it was me as a 10-year-old flipping the channels, and I don't know if myself or another viewer would maybe be that invested. Maybe not a casual viewer, but it's interesting to see, you talk about it and see how much depth there is to this show. Whereas, if you're just watching at a surface level, it's, people walking around a ship and there's a flower floating in space at one point.
I mean, I think the problem in this B plot is it just doesn't interact in any way with the A plot. Like they're too disparate. Like there's no, obviously they can't always tie together perfectly, but there's no like the mind war never causes an issue that like results in a problem in the B plot, or the B plot doesn't come in and help solve the A plot later on in the show. They're completely separate, which is I think maybe what makes this a weak B plot. Is it's perfectly serviceable, but there's so little connective tissue between the two. I mean, thematically, I think you're probably right, and I actually think that theme in a science fiction TV show is like much bigger and more interesting than a lot of sci-fi tries to do. Like this, there's that concept of just like there are things in this universe so big and so unknowable that we may never know them, and there's kind of that interstellar dread that like lives under that theme, which I think is like a really cool concept. But I don't know if they tied them together well enough to really like knock it out of the park. Like it's there and you can taste it, but it's that taste. It's like Rachel, what you're saying, like it's like you get mad when you get to the end. It's because it just gives you a taste, but it's not even that it needs to explain it all, but it just didn't push it. It needed to push everything a step further and tie them together a little.
Yeah, I wrestle because sometimes I do like a B plot like this in which the beginning of it is where it's like Sinclair and Catherine practically shake hands and go, we're going to go off on our own plots now, and that's kind of it, and they tie in thematically. Sometimes I do get a little bit tired of how shows have to bend over backwards to have that scene in which it's like, and Garibaldi walks over to Jakar and just go, have you seen Catherine? Just so that the plots can tie together plot-wise, because I feel like it's a tug of war. Like sometimes you do need the connective tissue narratively and plot wise to these plots, but also Babylon 5 and Deep Space Nine and shows like this that take place in practically a city, you are also afforded the right to not have to necessarily have that happen, because you can just say, this is a little story happening on this corner of the ship, and this is a little story happening on that corner of the ship.
They are a mystery. And I am both terrified and reassured to know that there are still wonders in the universe, that we have not yet explained everything.
G'Kar being involved raises this plot's interest up, because that character and that performance is just captivating to watch. Like, the alien makeup, say what you will, if it's good, bad, whatever, his demeanor, like seeing him like sidle up to the side of the frame when they say there's a contested space and there's somebody who owns it, you see him just sidle up to the side of the frame and it zooms out and you see it's this guy and he's given this look like, yeah, it's me. You're interested. You're like, okay, what's this guy going to be all about?
He's the breakout character for sure. There's no question.
Oh, I don't know. We can talk about that A-plot with Mr. Bester, the Psychop, played by Chekhov himself. This is kind of the reason I chose this episode for you, because I was really interested to hear all of our thoughts on seeing someone who... Is it right to say that he's well known for being a more comedic character? I don't know. Like, Chekhov, I guess, is a comedic character by nature. I don't know.
Nuclear vessels.
I was just about to say, I would disagree with that, only because, not that comment, Rachel, but I think if you watch the original series Star Trek, he's not a funny character. He's a character that gets beaten up a lot, and he's sort of like, he's the character who goes, hey, Kipton, there's something on the view screen, and that's about it. It wasn't till later in the movies where he clearly was like, guys, I got to do something to do. And then, everyone loves the fourth Star Trek movie because you have that levity, and I think he had a little something to work with, but I don't think he was terribly comedic in the original series.
I don't know, that hippie episode, that one where the hippies took over the ship, that was pretty funny. But like, Rachel, for you had watched some of the original series, and I had prefaced to you, Chekhov's in this, and he plays a baddie, and that's all I had to say.
Yeah, and I was just like, okay, this is just the actor being an actor.
Like, you didn't have that bias that many people do with...
No, I wasn't attached to him as Chekhov, definitely not in the way that you were.
Well, I say this because I think it's fair to say that all of the original series actors are trapped being those characters for most people. Shatner, if anyone, is the one that broke away the most, with other characters like T.J. Hooker and Denny Crane being iconic in their own right. But he will be Captain Kirk.
Leonard Nimoy took a lot of naked photos, though. Yeah.
And he wrote a lot of books saying, I'm not Spock, and then saying, I am Spock, actually.
I was always Spock.
But this is... Walter Koenig, this is his other thing. Yeah. This is like, for sci-fi people, this is... Oh, no, but he played Mr. Bester, though. Like, yeah, he played Chekhov, but then he played Mr. Bester.
You know, it's funny you say that. I was doing a little bit of research behind his character on this, and the one quote I found from him was, he said, Babylon 5 was really the best fun I've ever had on television. The character was complex, he was unpredictable. In Star Trek, it was never, Captain, I see something terrible, and let me tell you how I feel about this. And I thought that was, we only obviously have just seen him in this episode, but clearly he has a lot more to work with than he did on Star Trek. And that's partially fair and partially unfair, because I think TV shows in the 60s, they're just different shows. So you have your star, and like Shatner was the star, Nimoy was like star number 2, maybe you argue who was the real star of the show, and the rest were just like furniture that you moved around as necessary, right?
Except for DeForest Kelley, he was also the other star.
That's true. I'm a Bones fan, but the other characters don't always get a lot to work with unless it sort of serves something for those other, big three.
Yeah. It's
and
all around the triad.
Yeah, and so he gets a little bit to do here. So like, I don't blame him that this is what he likes.
He did a great job, I thought. I liked him in this as this character. I was just like, oh, he's, really bringing some acting to it. I honestly was just like, yeah, he's good. I like this character. Like I said, I'm sorry to hear he's a big bad guy, because I'm like, I really like him.
No, you're like him as he's a likable bad guy.
He sells it.
Yeah, because I was curious, like, you guys, I'm sure over the many shows you've covered have had one or two Star Trek actors turn up in them. I swear you guys have done a show with Shatner in it at some point.
Tech War.
Tech War, that's it.
Well, Walter Koenig showed up in one weird scene in the Quester tapes, too. It was just like he shows up and he's like, here's your book. And then he like walked away. I'm like, that's it? That's all he got?
Yeah.
Well, I was trying to think of the other Star Trek actors. We've seen Sulu. He
Nimoy.
popped into Beyond Westworld. And yes, of course, Nimoy was that race car driver with psychic abilities.
Yeah, and I was just curious, like, when you watch this episode, and I think I did, mention, like, oh, it has Chekhov in it as well. Did you at all have that little bias within you where it's just like, oh, it's a Star Trek guy, and was that challenged with him being so different to that Star Trek guy?
No, I was just happy to see it. Like, it's like seeing an old friend or something. You're like, hey, look who's here.
Yeah, I think I felt the same way. It was just like, I recognized, like, obviously the first thing you think is Chekhov. That's his distinctive character. That's the character, he will always be remembered for. But yeah, it wasn't like I was like, I can't see him as this guy with black gloves. Chekhov never wore black gloves.
I actually really like his introduction because he just walks onto the ship and you don't know who he is. And he just looks at a dude and the dude responds as if he talked to him. And I'm just like, oh, I like this version of using like this like psychic power. Where he just walks in and like nobody even like questions it. We're just like, oh, right this way. Well, why didn't you say so? Like, I just really like, and I thought Walter Koenig did a good job of just like giving the look that told you like basically what he said. And I was like, oh, this is great. I like this sort of introduction to his character.
If I was a psychic, I'd be really catty. I'd always be like bad-mouthing people to my friends constantly.
And you kind of get that vibe between the two psychops. They kind of give each other these looks like, these damn normal humans, these normies I'm ever to talk to. Like, the person who opposes it is Sinclair when they come into his office and he starts talking to them and then he's like, oh, wait a moment.
Get out of my head.
Get out of my head, as the DVD summary says.
Yeah.
And he's like super pissed off. Like, Sinclair's like, how fucking dare you? And you get that chilling kind of back and forth where Bester's like, well, look, there are rules for, like, him and his partner, Kelsey. There are rules for telepaths.
And then
there are rules. And since we're cops, we're allowed to do things that other people can't do. And that was like gross and terrifying and timeless in a way, like very timely. Where it's like, oh yeah, obviously bad.
I felt his explanation made perfect sense. He comes in and the guy's just like, get out of my head. He's like, sorry, like, it's just easier to do it this way. It's like if someone's like, oh, can we just get on a phone call? I'm like, no, this is a text. We don't need a phone call about this. Like, let me just jump into your brain and give you the information. I don't need to talk to you about it.
Yeah, and again, he's a bad guy because they're dressed in little SS outfits with their little badges and their black gloves and their like parted hair, and they look very menacing. And so to have a guy like that invade your mind just to say hello, you're like, oh, please get out of my brain. I don't want you crawling around in there. You get that great scene later on where Garibaldi's talking about that too, where he's just like, I don't like them. They look at us like we're bugs, which ties into the ants conversation as well.
I have a question for Jordan and Luke about the Cyclops. How did you feel when the female Cyclops gets exploded?
Yeah, she gets evaporated.
Disappointed. I was very much looking forward to someone being vaporized, and I'm like, you guys should have pushed it. I know you can do the effects. I've seen the space flower now. I wanted that vaporization to be like, I was just like so excited to see someone get vaporized. I was just like, no more, give me more.
Well, I knew if one was going to go, it wasn't going to be old Bester. I knew it.
Yeah, Bester was safe.
Yeah.
He was safe.
Even though, like, within the show, it is kind of just because Sinclair punches him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the only thing that stopped him.
I do love that.
So many other things in this show would not be the same if Sinclair punched the woman instead.
You know what I do appreciate in a show where it's like, we have telepathic people. How do you neutralize a telepath if you don't have powers to block them? Oh, fucking knock them out. That's a good starting point.
Punches
I like
always
that.
work.
Yeah.
I can't use their thoughts if they're unconscious.
You were talking about Garibaldi earlier, and like how he also doesn't care for these psychops. I gotta say, because we're not gonna talk about him because he's a minor character this episode. I hate this space cop. He's an awful space cop. I don't like him in any way, shape, or form. So every psychic in this show hates him, and I was like, I like these psychics.
Garibaldi's a horn dog and a little bit of a sleazeball, but he is a cop as well. And they do comment upon that when they bring Bester back for several more episodes. He's just like, you're a cop, I'm a cop. We're not really that different. And he's like, yeah, but you're like a mine cop. And he's like, so? But I do love that scene in CNC where Garibaldi does the usual thing where it's like, here's the exposition. Jason Ironheart could be in these locations. We're going to narrow it down there. I don't like these psychops. They treat us like bugs, which again ties into Jakar's whole thing about there's something bigger than you, something more beyond. And the telepaths think of themselves as more beyond than the rest of us mere mortals who don't have mind powers. And then I love when Bester walks into CNC and he's like commenting upon the conversation because he's reading his mind about it. He's like, oh, 50 level? Oh, that's great. Good job. And then just Garibaldi.
That's not too much to handle.
And then Garibaldi clearly has like some mean thought where he's basically like, go fuck yourself or shove your head up your ass or whatever it is. And I love everything you need to know. This is what I do love about Babylon 5. They always have those moments, those little moments. That's kind of hard to describe, but it's like a snapshot of all you need to know about the character. And that interaction with Bester is all I need to know about Bester, where he's lingering on every word, being like, anatomically impossible, Mr. Garibaldi, but you're welcome to try anytime, anywhere. And he has like this ghoulish grin on his face, and as soon as Garibaldi turns his back, he just drops the grin instantly. Like, this is him replicating a human emotion here, because he's just such a psychopathic weirdo. And that drop of the grin, everything I need to know about this villain. Like, okay, this is the kind of guy this guy is. He's this smirking, weird little man who, as soon as your back is turned, his real agenda shows. Like, he's this creepy, unfeeling person. And isn't that just the person you want as a psychic cop?
It's a great
I think
scene.
he'd be a really good dinner date, though.
Such a cutie.
Yeah.
Good old Psychor. You guys never cease to amaze me. All the moral fiber of Jack the Ripper. What do you do in your spare time? Juggle babies over a fire pit? Oops, there goes another calculated risk.
You're not helping the situation.
Lady, you are the situation.
Luke, what did you think of the actual plot of Jason Ironheart comes aboard the ship? I mean, we've seen all of these we've seen this sci-fi kind of plot before, right? Where it's like the weirdo comes on the ship and a bunch of weird stuff happens and the heroes have to solve it. But what did you think of this story and how it started to unfold?
I mean, it's a slow burn, and I think maybe a couple steps too slow. But like, I think the basic concept of the A plot, like as I got further into, like once I kind of got into like what was happening, I started getting more invested in it. I think they definitely did Talia dirty by making her ex-professor also be her ex-lover. It's just like, there was no reason for it.
It was super unnecessary.
It was so unnecessary and just such a slight to that character. I was just like, you guys, why are you doing this to this character? It's not fair. But here's the thing. What I liked is they're talking about, like, they're building these super psychics who are like 12 on the psychic scale, who are going to be able to like move great objects. And then like when he makes the big reveal, it's like, no, what we've done though is we realized we're such good telekinetics that we can actually work at the subatomic electron level now. And I was just like, oh, that's a cool idea for I don't think I've seen the concept of telekinesis dealt with, not on large objects, but the concept of like being able to go small. And then I started realizing like, oh, this is just Dr. Manhattan. We've got Dr. Manhattan on the ship. I'm kind of interested to see where this is going.
Right. What about you, Jordan?
I think as soon as the mindquakes started happening, I was on board. I was just like, more mindquakes. Also, now the ship looked a little bit messy, but then when it got all mindquakey, it got even more messy. But like, there's no one cleaning this place, right? Because it's already messy, and they were mentioning there's ants everywhere. So it's just a dirty ship.
There's homeless people on the ship. Like,
okay, I didn't want to say that, but it sure looked like
the whole point of Babylon 5 in comparison to Star Trek is no. All the baggages, all the problems still come with us into space. So Babylon 5 had a much, like, the ship because it was 4 previous stations, had far less of a budget. They made shortcuts in its construction, and they kind of just opened it just to open it because the previous 3 have exploded and the 4th one disappeared randomly. And so they're like, just open it. It's not fully ready, but fuck it. And so it has that kind of raggy look to it. And yeah, I do love, there's these details like Jason Einhart, like, I love in this story where it's like, and the weirdo comes to the ship. What does the weirdo do when he comes to the ship? He goes to the real estate agent. And he's like, can I book a room to stay for a while? And she's just... Go on.
I just want to say, renting that room, one of my favorite parts was she's like, oh, and it's got a vibe shower. I'm like, oh, sweet, a shower. No water, just vibes. I'm into it.
Yeah, they even make a point like only the high-ranking officers on the ship get water showers because it's just too hard to do that because they only have so many resources on this ship. And the ship Babylon 5 spins because it has to create its own gravity. Because it's so big that if you can actually spin it, it would generate its own gravity. Because they don't have artificial gravity. It's like very low tech in a lot of ways, this show. But yeah, I agree. I haven't really seen too many sci-fi materials where they have the telepathic and telekinetic characters kind of introduce it like this sinisterly. It tells you so much about Earth as a culture, though, that, oh, we have our own telepaths, and what do we do with them? We put them in a little box. And we oppress them and we try to control them because we're afraid of them. Because wouldn't you be? Wouldn't you be deathly afraid if randomly one day in your culture a sect of people rose up that had mind powers? You would want to control that. You would at least think... Go on.
The way I was reading it, because they talked a little bit about the idea that, and which is where I thought they mislabeled this episode. It should have been Cold Mind War, but... It's because they're talking about, like, they were saying that their sort of enemies also had psychics, and they were just kind of in an arms race, it felt like, with psychics. So I didn't feel like that the psychics were, like, necessarily despondent, but more that they were just like, we're just in this, like, arms race. Like, psychics are nuclear bombs, and we just need to have the best one.
Oh, that is there too, but then you get Jason's conversation about, it's like, no. They want to control everything. You thought the government was controlling us? No. We're controlling the government because That's changing. It's all changing. It's like we used to serve the government because they used to control us, but now we're changing our minds about that. We can read their thoughts and blackmail them. Isn't that a scary concept to introduce into your sci-fi show where it's just like, oh, the government is being controlled by a group of people who are pissed off about having been controlled by the government in the first place, and they have mind powers.
Their first mistake was not letting the psychics be ship's counselors. I mean, that's obviously what you do if you have a psychic.
It's true. Well, she's just an empath.
It is funny, though, that Luke mentioned, I think the one, maybe the best way to say is the timestamp on this, is that they had to shoehorn that the only way you could be empathetic towards this guy is if you had a previous relationship with him, as opposed to just, there's a guy here, he's clearly in some sort of peril. You don't know if it's physical or mental or emotional. And it's like, well, we have to have a character be able to care about him. I guess she used to be having sex with him. That would make you want to care with him. And it's not like that it's bad.
It's manipulative.
Works enough in the show. But yeah, it's just like, it's not needed. And it's just, you could chalk it up to, well, it's 1993. And I'll be honest, I thought that was the weakest part of this episode was I didn't really buy that they had a previous relationship, because I think, and that's not any of the actors' fault, because it's like clearly this guy's is his one time on the episode. They need to have this back history, and it's like they have 3 scenes together, and it just doesn't really land. And again, I don't think it needed to, because they didn't need to have that. It could have just been, if it's that specific area you want, okay, just have her be the one that happens to reach out to him and the one to help him. But it just was like, eh.
I buy the, like, ex-student-teacher relationship more than the ex-lover.
Yeah, it's just a lazy way of certifying that she would have this trust of him, because the episode presents it that he's this rogue danger that these guys are having to come collect. And of course, you know that there's going to be a twist because the Psychops are, I mean, look at them. of course they have an agenda. Of course they're not the good guys. But you have also been presented at the very beginning of the episode that he erased a whole crew, like whole ships of people at the very beginning of the episode. So you know there's something off about him. So they needed to make a sympathetic edge, and they thought, oh, have a former backstory with a character. Of course, Talia, because she's the psychic on the ship, this is supposed to be her episode, and it's not just because she's the woman of the ship too. They do this with the guys as well. It's a very lazy tactic of they're the old lover. And I think what they were also trying to do with making him the former teacher is to just hammer in something that is already obvious, which is Psychor is gross because he obviously groomed her, obviously. That's also like, that's
you know
what
what
we're
though? I think you're almost reading too much into it. I would be surprised if in 1993 they had that viewpoint that like, isn't it also gross as a teacher? I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I think it was just like
they kind of.
I don't think
they kind of do delve into that as the show goes along. Like the Psychor are all about like purity. It's like if we get this psi level and this psi level and make them breed, then we can get a higher one. They have forced marriages as it goes along, so they do have this thing, and this is like an early sign. Like this is early of like indicator, and I get that.
I don't think that they would have used that language, but it
but that's what it
definitely is meant to be unsettling. Of like,
but it's never,
like when did this relationship start?
But it just doesn't work because it's never addressed, and it only seems to be there just so that we can assume that Talia actually trusts him.
Again, it's a shortcut.
Because even if they were an old mentor, it's been like who knows how many years, and he's a completely different guy. And here's the issue too. Why we don't buy they have a romantic relationship in any way, and I barely buy that they have a mentor-peer relationship, is he has to do a difficult thing as an actor. He has to, from the drop, act as somebody who is evolving. And I think that actor did a really good job. Like, for what he has to do, like, he has to do my head hurts. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't allow, from an acting perspective, to do the romantic peer chemistry with the other actor, because he's too busy acting like he is evolving on the molecular level.
He's struggling to maintain a balance and a focus.
And also, the past, all these petty things like what Jakar says about the ants. All of that is dropping away from him. All of that is insignificant. He is becoming something else. So that, again, doesn't allow him as an actor or the script to make us buy that they even have this intense past. They have to make it that Talia has to sell it to us and to Sinclair in the scene that we all have joked about, have you ever wondered what it was like for telepaths to make love? And that scene is there to tell us many things, but most importantly, it's there to tell us and to tell Sinclair, I vouch for this man because I know him. And they couldn't communicate that effectively with Jason and Talia because, again, he is acting as somebody who is evolving and doesn't care about these petty things anymore. So it's restrictive. It's restrictive. So, again, like you guys have all said, it does feel very forced and very manipulative and very 1990s, but also, like, having watched Star Trek Discovery doesn't feel that 1990s. But, Rachel, what else within this kind of plot do you get or enjoy or had anything else you want to say? Because he becomes...
Oh, yeah. He becomes...
he becomes all over the ship. It's gross.
Yeah.
He just keeps becoming.
Like, he covers an entire sector with his become.
He's become...
I mean, he blocks all of the walkways, tubes, everything is clogged with his become. It's a lot.
It's in her brain.
Yeah.
And in classic time, right after he becomes, he's like, I'll see you in a million years, and leaves.
Yeah, to Sinclair, though. To Sinclair.
Yeah,
he's like, see you in a million years, bye.
How is he going to see Sinclair in a million years? What on earth does that mean?
Well, you have to watch the show to find out.
That does actually make sense.
Kind of.
Sinclair lives to be a million years old.
Well, you're assuming that that's the case. There could be something called time travel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're assuming that it's a million years in the future, too.
Yeah, just a million years.
Next episode.
Yeah, next episode. A million years. Where it's like,
oh, sorry, I meant 1,000,000 seconds. Like, that's not as long.
I mean, other than I want to talk about him becoming, but like other than that, this is it's good because you get to have some interesting lore. Like, that's what this is about. And that's the thing. What do you prefer as a sci-fi viewer? Do you prefer world-building episodes, lore episodes? Do you prefer your character-filled episodes, a funny episode, a depressing episode? What's your pick? And shows like this are going to try to hit all of those with different episodes. Like, different episodes serve different purposes. For me, this is not one of my favorites because as interesting as the Cyclops are and the lore is, I would rather have had a stronger defined episode for Talia Winters, but at the end of it, she walks away this pretty much the same way she started, except for now she can move something with her mind, and that isn't necessarily character growth, that is just lore, and this will be brought up later stuff.
Yeah, and you also get the impression, well, she knows that this is a dangerous gift that she's been given, and she's going to have to hide it.
And I don't feel like at the end of this, her viewpoints on the Psy-Corps were challenged all that much with after all the stuff she heard. It doesn't feel like, oh, she's really going to be changing her perspective on this. It kind of just feels like this was a thing that happened to her, and then she will be in another episode.
Yeah, like this isn't a straw that's going to lead to the camel's back breaking and her walking away from the Psy-Corps. It does not feel like it has that much
weight. No.
Yeah.
Jason,
I have become. In memory of love, I give you a gift.
I actually, by the end of the episode, the thought I was left with was I'm kind of on the Cyclops side because
me too.
They were looking to get rid of this guy because he was getting out of control. He was unstable. He had too much power. And then what happens is he becomes something that clearly has way too much power and is this huge entity now. I'm like, yeah, this seems to be a bigger problem than those mindquakes were.
But they want to replicate that. That's the difference, though. They want to find out what the code was, what the series of drugs were, so that they could replicate it with people who are willing to do the job. Because he really thought that the Psy-Corps were good. Like, he was naive. Like, Jason Ironheart.
He volunteered.
He volunteered because he thought that they were the good guys.
You should have looked at those gloves. There's no way they're the good guys.
Yeah, that's on Jason Ironheart right there.
Yeah. and that's the thing, like, Talia is the same too, where she's innocent and naive and indoctrinated and doesn't realize things. But imagine if someone like Bester got that power and was willing to use it. See, Jason wasn't willing to use it. He didn't want to. And that's what makes it a dangerous thing with the Psy-Corps is they wanted to replicate this power that no one should ever, ever have. And that's what makes them the bad guys.
I don't know. I'm still kind of on their side.
You can be on their side. I mean, it's because Bester's so charming and you want to give him a little pinch on the cheek. And
I want to be snarky behind other people's back with him, and we just look at each other, then we start giggling, and they're like, "What? Is it my shirt?" I'm like, "I'll never tell."
And I do appreciate that he does wrap up, like, I do like that Sinclair. Usually in these shows, you expect the heroic commander to be like, I bested you in a nice way. But in this, he's just like, no. I'm going to blackmail you. And I want to make sure that Talia doesn't get in trouble. And I'm going to hold this information over you. Because you fucked up, Bester. Like, you didn't tell us things that you should have told us. People got hurt. People died. Your partner died. This is all on you. But I'm going to make sure that I hold this information so that it can benefit me. And I like that Bester indignantly is like, but that's a lie. And he's like, yeah, isn't that rad? Isn't it cool that I'm using this over you? Fuck off. Get off my ship. You got 20 minutes. You better be on that ship, buddy. And then Bester does the wave from the little salute from the prisoner. And he says, be seeing you. And you get that look like, I'll be back to fuck you up real good later.
Like, oh, you may have gotten something over me, but I will fuck you up.
I'm a psychop. You can't have that much of an advantage over me for long. I'll find out something.
Well, what was weird to me was that both plots in some ways kind of ended the same, which was, again, for me, maybe a little too neat and a little too pat, which is like, something happened. Anyways, it just is over now. You know, it's like, oh, the space flower. We won't talk about that anymore. Okay, I guess we won't. And then it's like, hey, this guy just became this weird computer-generated god in the sky. We're not going to talk about it anymore, right? Like, yeah, we're not going to talk about it. All right, episode done. And maybe that's a little unfair, but it felt a little bit like, it was almost like there was another 10 minutes or so that was needed. They're just like, no, it's commercial break.
I guess the lingering thing, and again, this feels like it falls under the rug because the character arc and journey wasn't strong, but I guess the thing is, Talia has the power. She has telekinesis, which is very difficult to have because most of the telekinetics are, like, insane, clinically insane, as they say. So I guess that's the thing that's lingering at the end. Like, that's the thing that's like, okay, that's supposed to be the mic drop rather than like what the tree aliens were or, oh, Jason became. It's like what the mic drop is supposed to be is she can move things with her mind now.
Which doesn't feel like that big of a deal.
It does feel like a big deal if we cared about Talia more.
Yeah, like it could have been something like, oh my god. But it's just like, oh, okay. Oh yeah, she did say that she did it with a penny. She's doing it with a penny now.
My biggest issue with Talia as a character in the show as a whole, and it's a double-edged sword because I understand from a writing perspective what they're trying to do, which is this show, all of the cast, as you even saw in this episode with the minimal amount of cast you saw, are very active characters. They know what they want. They're going to go get it. They're not passive. They're not bystanders. They are willing to voice their opinion. They're. That's what Walter Koenig loved about being Bester. He wasn't a passive character. He was active. He was pursuing. Talia isn't. She's the only character in the show, in the cast, that her character is passive. She is led by others. She was influenced by others. She is affected by others. And that's kind of the issue is that's supposed to be her story. Story-wise, she's supposed to start out as the innocent, naive victim of indoctrination and is supposed to become awake to the terrors of it and eventually rise up against it and fight up against it and become a strong-willed character. As an arc, that sounds very interesting. But when you put that as the only character like that in a show where you have like 15 characters that are very well defined and are actively pursuing the things they want, and that is far more engaging as a viewer, it makes Talia Winters feel boring and lackluster. But from a writing perspective, it makes sense, doesn't it? Like, isn't that something that could be good to explore?
Here's what they could have done. They could have had her at the very beginning of the episode. Her thing is she's always using the vending machine, and so she's always putting change in it. And then later on, she gets horribly paralyzed, and she's really worried that her life is over. But then when she gets the powers, she moves the coin, and she's like, I can still keep getting things out of the vending machine. I mean, honestly, it's a great rewrite, right?
There you go. But yeah, I think that's the issue with Talia. I mean, we got to talk about it proper. Guys, you watch this on its own isolated episode. Tell us your journey with when Jason became.
I mean, it's a great effect. It's really just like the worst. It's bad for 1993 or whatever.
It looked like a Gatorade ad is what it looked like.
It looked like the Galaxy Brain. Like, you know, the Galaxy Brain.
Oh, yeah, the meme? Yes, absolutely. They really committed to it, too, because I thought it was just like, they got to do it. They got to show it to you for a hot second, because, like, we've come this far in the episode, and yes, they have
Yeah, we've become this far, yeah.
So we've become this far, so we have to show it to you for a quick second. But they keep cutting back to it, and then he's talking to us this thing, and I'm like, stop showing us this thing. You know what, actually, Jordan, you mentioned Star Trek 4, Hunt for the Whales.
Star Trek 5 is what you're talking about.
Is that 5?
No, 4 is the whale one.
Well, 5 is when he talks to God.
God, yeah.
Oh, yeah, no. In 4, when they go back in time, I don't know if anyone remembers this because I just watched it. There's, for some reason, that defies explanation, an entirely computer-generated image sequence where they just computer-generate all of the main cast's faces.
Oh, that's
I remember.
right. Yeah.
And I just kept thinking that when I watched this, I'm just like, this is as ill-conceived as that concept.
But like throughout the episode, he's telling us, I'm going to become, and I'm evolving. What did you think this was all going to lead to? And like, what was it like to see what it led to? Because like, it's fucking nuts.
By the time he started talking about pulling people's atoms apart, which I was like excited about, I'm like, all right, I like this. I like that he's going to just going to rip people to shreds. This is how psychic he's gotten. I kind of knew he was going to go full Dr. Manhattan. I knew he was like losing his ability to like connect with mere mortals, etc., etc. And, you know, I was a little worried he'd go full Wesley Crusher as well. And just and he honestly, that's kind of what happened. I think this is a little bit of that Wesley Crusher leaving the show. It doesn't quite land, but I understand the idea. He has become like a being of energy. But
yeah,
I would have rather him just be like, oh, I can just like snap my fingers and go total Q. I would rather he became a Q, I think, than this like kind of super being. It didn't, I don't know. Maybe if I knew more about the other super beings, I could have clicked it. This is what I mean. I think this
is like the first super being though. Like I think the whole point is he's like, I'm becoming unstable. It's not like a Q, like I'm evolving in a way where I will be able to be in control of things. The whole point, I feel like I'm evolving in a way where I'm like becoming just energy and matter and like all of this crazy stuff.
Yeah, there was one last turn they need. There's just like something else that just would have like clicked.
I've got
it.
it.
It just felt like
flown
it
over to
ended
those.
too early.
He should have flown over to those flowers, and they would have been friends. They're both these huge now, sort of weird entities that we don't understand. They should just. He like rode off on a flower at the end. That'd have been good.
Goodbye, Commander. I will see you again in a million years.
Any other highlights or things you guys want to touch upon that we didn't? It's a pretty meaty episode, but also lean enough as well.
Did we mention the shortage of the Q40?
No. Could you please mention it again?
I don't know why I enjoyed that so much. I really did.
Do you remember what the Q stood for?
No. What was it?
Quantium.
Oh, that is terrible when there's a shortage of quantium.
Quantium 40. How could we be running out of it? I'm just quickly looking through my notes being like, any other interesting things?
Does anybody remember why that's an issue, though?
No, what was the issue?
I'm pretty sure
they just needed it?
Because it's used to make spaceships.
Oh, that's right. It's used for jump gates. The jump gates, which is...
it's now not nearly as funny because it's actually useful. I just thought it was just a throwaway.
I guess one note I should bring up is the music. It's a lot. The music's a lot in this episode. The music's always kind of a lot, but it's a lot of a lot in this one. And
it's very distinctive in this episode in particular.
It's an issue of, I've seen this so many times, that when Jason comes to meet, when he comes to meet Talia for that first time, they play that theme of his. Like, I always think of it as the Jason theme, which also they use that. I think they use that theme music for the DVD menus as well. So it's a very iconic musical piece to me, but it's so like overblown in the scene. Like the scene is just like, hey Talia, but there's this music being like really, really over the top 80s, 90s sci-fi. But I remember it. There's something to be said about that. Like, I remember that theme. There's some that I don't remember in these shows, but I do remember that theme. And so there's something to be said there, at least. But it is one of those things that's like, and there's the music.
It's a good theme. I actually liked the opening credits. Like, it was a good lead-in. The sort of, like, they give you that, like, monologue explaining, like, how everything happened. I thought that worked well. But I realized I wrote down a line from that opening monologue that really also kind of made me laugh. Because they're like setting it up. It's like, it's the last Babylon station, and these are the stories. I believe the line before it starts is like, the name of the place is Babylon 5. I'm like, the name of the place is
the name of the place is Babylon 5. I love his voice saying it though. My favorite line in the opening credits, I've said it many times, is, "It was a dream given form." It's a great
it's a
line
good opening
delivery.
credit sequence. I did like it.
Yeah. I think that's about it. Let's go, Rachel, to our Actors Spotlight section, in which we talk about an actor in the episode, talk about what we know them from, talk about what we thought about him in the episode. We've already kind of done it. Walter Koenig is the person of discussion for this, and I still have this thing with him in this show, though, where I genuinely, when I see him in Star Trek now, just go, Mr. Bester. I rarely think of him as Chekhov. Like, that's how memorable of a mark that's how big of a mark he makes as this character to me, where when people bring him up, they're like, Chekhov. I'm like, no, but Mr. Bester, though, with his little gloves and his little black outfit and all of that. And he's definitely, like, we say Jakar's the highlight, but I do think we have to give Bester a shout out. He is what this episode's remembered for in a lot of ways, not just because it's Chekhov, but he's just one of those antagonists that comes on the ship and they know exactly who they are and what they want. Those are usually the great antagonists in your show, where they just walk on the ship and you get the feeling just from the performance that the actor knows exactly everything about this character. They know what they think, what their viewpoints are, what their, everything about them. And Walter, I think, embodies that, like we said earlier in that very first scene when he's just chatting without actually using his mouth, like just beaming it into his brain. He does a really good job physically as an actor communicating that, because it could be really cheesy, right? You could just have had him doing the telepathic squinting with the eyes and all of that to communicate it, but he does do that touch where you see what you can clearly see what he was saying just by his facial expressions alone, which again, he never got to do that as Chekhov. The best stuff he got to do as Chekhov is get knocked out in Star Trek 4. Like, that's his thing, is just like running around, and that's kind of it. Here, he gets to do more subtle and nuanced things that, honestly, I didn't even know, I don't mean this as a disrespect to him, but I didn't know he could act in this way. Well, I only know him from Star Trek in a singular episode of Columbo where he just walks on to say, hello, I'm a cop too. I didn't know he could act, really. As Chekhov, that's not what I would call an acting role. That's just a gig. He doesn't really, he gets to do a funny accent. Here, I get to see in just this episode alone, this guy can actually act. This guy can give us nuances and layers and micro expressions. He doesn't have to do a silly voice. That's like a high praise. Is this presented a side of an actor that I didn't know existed, and I want to see more of it. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he does a great job with this role. I think it's just one of those things, is just he's been acting for so long, and when you see him come onto this, you can see he's very competent. He's been doing it for a long time. He's acting circles around people, and it's just he didn't get all the opportunities he could have because Star Trek kind of overshadowed his career. And, I think here you can definitely see, and I can see why in that quote Jordan found he enjoyed doing this, because, it's quite clear he has some depth, he has some range, and he just hasn't had much of a chance to use it. And yes, having him come on and play his role, it was a highlight of the episode for sure.
Yeah, Jordan, what do you think? When you saw this, did you have a similar thing where it's just we all know him for Chekhov, but would you say that oh, that's great acting there from this guy?
Well, I always kind of feel bad. I think you mentioned at the beginning of this podcast that, specifically the original cast of Star Trek, they all got really shoehorned into that. And there's a lot of actors, Christopher Reeve had a real hard time being anything but, Superman. Mark Hamill had a hard time being anything but Luke Skywalker. And you kind of feel bad for these actors that are probably better than the roles that they're, most known for. And I'm sure he's one of countless actors like that. So you watch him in this role and you're like, yeah, he could be doing other things. There's one thing I do want to mention that is only slightly off topic, but I was kind of looking into his other things he had done, and I didn't realize how much he had written and how plays and books and other things. But there's one thing that really tickled me, and I was laughing today at the office. He's written a couple autobiographies, and just recently, I think it was last year, he did an update of his autobiography, and it's making me laugh. What he chose to call his autobiography is beaming up and getting off. And I tell you, it was the best part of my day at the office, I tell you.
Yeah. Some interesting facts about him in this role is JMS, the creator of this show, had worked with Walter on a radio program that JMS was running, and he knew him for theater a lot and just knew that Walter Koenig had this energy to him. And when JMS eventually got to make Babylon 5, this is like his baby, this is his show. Before he was working on other shows like She-Ra and He-Man and Murder, She-Ra, but this was like his big baby. He wanted to bring in these actors that he knew could do better, or knew could be presented in a way that they hadn't been on television. And obviously he wanted to bring Walter in because he had worked with him before, knew he was a really good actor, and he had written this role for him that is a different one that comes in a few episodes later, in which there are these two guys that invade Sinclair's mind. And he wanted him for that role, and he sent him the script, and Walter was like, I'm on board, I want to do this script. And then he had a massive heart attack. Walter Koenig had a massive heart attack. He had to have a bypass, all this terrible stuff. And JMS said, it's okay, we'll hold the script for you, because we want you so bad. Unfortunately, he couldn't hold the script, they had to put it on. And he said, don't worry, when you're better, I'll give you a different role. And he gave him this role, which Walter said this too. His heart attack, although a tragedy, was a blessing in disguise, because that original performance that he was scripted for was a one and done. The character at the end of that episode gets fucked up and they could not come back. So, weirdly enough, him having this heart attack and it all being delayed allowed him to come in as Bester, who will become a recurring villain in the series. He has like 14 episodes, and one of Walter Koenig's favorite performances. He cherishes this. Like, if you ever watch convention videos and all of that, when anyone asks him about B5, he perks up energy-wise. Like, he's like, I'm sick of talking about Star Trek, but B5, I'm here for it. And so I love that kind of behind-the-scenes stuff, because there's an alternative world in which this character doesn't get to exist, and doesn't get to exist with this performance. It's a blessing in disguise that he unfortunately had a massive heart attack, but in a way, like, it made for great television. Like, even Walter Koenig got JMS to come to his star ceremony on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and he got him because he does consider this to be one of his best performances. And I think that's just kind of neat. Like, JMS really wanted him for this role. He wanted him for a role, and then stuff got in the way, and he tried to hold it, and then he couldn't, and then he's like, I'll write you an even better character, because I really want you on this show. Like, I kind of miss that attitude in modern television a lot. Like, it kind of just feels like we get a name for the sake of a name, and the argument is, you could say they got him because he's Chekhov, but you can clearly tell from the writing, they got him because he's a good actor. Like, if they got him just because he was Chekhov, the character wouldn't be written the way it is and perform the way it is, because this is not Chekhov. This is clearly not that character at all. And you can tell
and not in the way where it's like, oh, we're going to do the opposite of Chekhov.
Yeah.
We're going to make it, like, we're going to have it with blackjack and hookers this time.
Yeah. We're going to do a 90s gritty Chekhov where he has an even thicker Russian accent and all of that. But no, that's kind of like the big thing about Walter Koenig in Babylon 5. And in this, I thought we should probably spotlight him. I mean, he's had, like you guys said, a pretty massive career. Like, people think of him just as Star Trek, but the guy's been acting and writing, and he's still doing stuff. He's still doing conventions. Like, I saw him only like a week or two ago. He's still doing the conventions and still actively engaging with the audience and the crowds, which, God bless him, because if I was his age, I would just stop doing it. I would just stop.
You and I will be doing these conventions, right? The podcast conventions in
well
our
into
80s.
our 80s, yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait.
You know what is funny? You mentioned that, though, because I did see, again, I was reading some things he had said, and there is sort of this feeling he seems to have about Star Trek, which is, it seemed to be this, not quite embarrassment, but he had mentioned he feels bad sometimes because there's such enthusiasm for Star Trek, and it was such a short part of his life, but clearly the thing everyone remembers him from, and it's hard to go to these conventions and have people tell you how much they love Chekhov, and he's like, and he just doesn't feel that same way. And he clearly does about Babylon 5, because as you said, if you mention Babylon 5, he has lots and lots to say. So, I mean, it's a nice thing for him as an actor that got a second shot to have the role that he clearly enjoyed.
from his like, as someone who is into acting and is an actor, I get what his complaints are with Star Trek. Like, the character of Chekhov it's not anything. It is just like we said, Commander, the Captain, there's something on the screen. Like, that's all it is. And there's that extra level too. If you remember, he was the replacement for Sulu because George Takei got an acting gig somewhere else, so they had him come on, and then Sulu came back. So even then, his role in Star Trek was to fill in for a more popular character than him, who had left the show for a little while, and then they came back. And here, Babylon 5, that's not the case. They specifically wanted him. And I think that would stick with you as an actor, rather than I was there because they needed someone to fill in for the bigger draw in the show. Like,
this is my role. These are my shoes that I get to fill.
I get to make choices as an actor rather than just be there. And you can tell he makes choices. Like, one of the little things that you may not have noticed is he makes a choice as an actor that Bester's, I think it's his left hand, is always in a clenched fist. Like, his thing was he's paralyzed in his hand. The classic, the villain has a failing within them, whether it be physical. And he adds that to the character. And if you look at it, you do see that in his performance. Like, he's really thought about it. While Chekhov, other than like how you do the accent, there's not much from an acting perspective to think about to give the nuances. So I would imagine having to spend like 50, 60 years talking about the layers of Chekhov must be a fucking nightmare. Because what layers? Other than I decided to make the V's W's and the W's V's. That's about the layers of his character as Chekhov. While here, Bester, there's so much, just this one episode, there's so much more to talk about from an acting perspective and from a viewer perspective than Chekhov. And I like Chekhov. He's actually a character I do like. I just want to stress that. Like, I actually like him in the movies quite a lot. He's wonderfully useless in the movies, and I love him for it.
Let's take it from the top. The top of what? Name. My name?
No, my name.
I do not know your name.
You play games with me, mister, and you're through.
I am? May I go now?
Play. Hello, old friend. It's been a while.
We do have an email from a listener who wanted to give us just some feedback, just some responses to a previous episode we discussed. A few episodes back, we're recording a little bit ahead of schedule things because obviously we have guests and everything. We have to line things up. But good pal Nick wanted to send through an email about infection.
Mm-hmm. And Nick writes, "Hey guys."
Hi, Nick.
I think in an outline, this episode would have looked like a good idea. Not sure on the production time, but if they had maybe a bit longer for rewrites, it probably would have been better.
Mm-hmm.
I do like the organic tech, as that plays a big role later. And the idea of IPX was introduced, so this is also important, though not quite as big of a deal as it could have been. Other than Third Space's use of IPX or its heavy mentions with Max Ellison in Crusade. Can I get a buzzer noise anytime I mention Crusade in an email?
I mean, Crusade is the spin-off, and I imagine you guys must have been pitched to do Crusade at some point, because Crusade is a fucking mess, and it's only one season. That's a show I could actually see you covering.
Yes, Jordan's arch nemesis at C. Chupik has recommended it as a possibility, and he's given me some details on it. It sounds like it was a disaster.
Yes.
And then, as Nick points out, the IPX is mostly ignored, but most people also try and ignore Crusade.
I do. I mean, it's bizarre to me, though. A fun fact about Crusade is Gary Cole is the lead actor in Crusade. And obviously most people know Gary Cole's had a massive career, but obviously most people may know him for Office Space, the film. And in Crusade, his character had this massive ring. It was like an Academy ring. He kept that ring, and he brought it in for Office Space. So the ring he wears in Office Space, which is actually quite an iconic piece of costuming in that movie, is actually a sci-fi prop.
It's from Crusade? That's very funny.
That's very funny.
Nick continues, "I know you are a bit ahead of schedule, so I'll just say..."
Oh, he knew ahead of me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just say that Parliament of Dreams is great.
That was
and
a previous
the
episode,
recent JMS commentary on YouTube was a nice reason to rewatch it ahead of Yum Yum's coverage.
Thank you.
How much I wish we got more of Caitlin Brown as Natoth, though.
Yeah.
She's one of the other heavy hitters of sci-fi. Something about her sultry line delivery just works, even when she is a lizard lady.
Yeah, because Jakar has a diplomatic attaché that was introduced last episode, and she was one of those actresses that walked in and was like, the makeup, not a fucking problem. I can still act underneath all this makeup. You can tell that I'm giving sultry looks even though I'm covered in rubber and have no eyebrows. Like,
listen, you had me at sultry lizard lady. I'm on board.
Yeah. She has this...
What if a sultry lizard lady kissed an ape? What would that look like? What's the logistics of that, do you think?
We would all be becoming all over the place.
We would be becoming all night long. Let's give Mind War a rating. Our rating system is yum being bad and yum yum being good. We don't give half yums. It is a very strict
This is a binary podcast. I like it. There's yes or there's a no.
It's a yum yum podcast. Yeah. There's only those options. So, Rachel, where do you land on Mind War? Yum or yum yum?
I don't know. Like, it's not bad, but it's not really good.
Took the words right out of my mouth.
It's fine, and I'm gonna go with a yum.
Yum. Jordan, what about you? Yum being bad and yum yum being good.
Well, you know, because you have such rigid rules here about yum or yum yum, and I can't give it a yum or anything like that.
No half yums. No half yums.
Yeah, no half yums. I'm unfortunately also just going to give it a yum.
Yum. I love a lot of this. Like, I love the performances. I think that this is one of the more consistent acting-wise. Like, I didn't feel like anyone in the cast was a weak link except for maybe Bester's partner, Kelsey. But it's kind of hard.
Vaporized, so it all works out.
But yeah, it's kind of hard to tell because she's just doing "I'm British." That must mean I'm evil.
Yeah.
But I do have issues, like I stated. I don't really care for the Talia stuff. I don't think it just needed to be more character focused on her, and what we do get focused on feels manipulative and hollow. So I have to give it a yum as well. Yum. Which leaves us to the last man standing. Where do you land, yum or yum yum?
Imagine I gave it a yum yum.
You can.
Listen, there's two big sci-fi ideas in these two that I'm like really into, but they just don't push them quite far enough. I like the Bester character. I'm all about that. He was really entertaining me, but it's a yum, I'm afraid. It just doesn't quite get there.
Yeah. Let's find out what we're going to be watching next time on Babylon 5.
On an all-new Babylon 5.
Let's hear what episode 7 is all about. You got the description ready?
I do. So it's episode 7, The War Prayer. Babylon 5 stretches miles from one end to the other, but there's not 1 inch available on board for racism. Oh, come on, guys. There's got to be an inch available. So Sinclair and Garibaldi act quickly when clandestine Home Guard members attempt a violent anti-alien campaign. There's not 1 inch available for racism. We can't give it 1 inch.
No. We can rent it, but we can't let it have businesses, okay?
Also, is anyone in the future still using inches? It should be there's not 1 centimeter available on board for racism.
Well, this is written by some stinky Americans.
Imperial system won out in the end.
Well, they say how many miles long the station is.
5 miles long.
In the opener as well.
Yeah.
Also, you're all aliens. You can't... It's crazy. Like, we have to stop with this thing where it's like, we're against aliens. You're all aliens. If you're all there, humans are aliens too.
Yeah. I do like they did mention in this episode that the station goes on Earth Standard Time. Like, sometimes when I watch these shows, I do wonder, how does time work? Like, in Babylon 5, how do the hours of the day work? Like, how do they clock that? I do like they give a little mention here, we go by Earth rotation time, which is interesting because it is an Earth station.
If all time measurements on planets evolved the way that ours did, all of it revolves around.
That gets a big yum yum.
Yeah, that's a yum yum right there.
That's a yum yum.
Around like how long their planet orbits are and all of that sort of stuff. And that does play into a plot later on of how like it's a different time measurement.
I do also appreciate that it's a little touch of saying, but we care about Earth though. Like literally in the show, you see it in the external shots. Babylon 5 is in the hanging out in the orbit of an actual planet. They don't go by its time. They go by Earth time because Earth made this fucking ship, and Earth is first, which is what the next episode will be dealing with, which is xenophobia. Oh boy, not 1 inch available on board though. So let's wrap this out. Guys, where can people find you and your show?
You could find Continuum Drag, anywhere you get a podcast. You could just type it in. It's spelled exactly like it sounds. Just type it right in there. You're gonna find Continuum Drag.
There's that high salesmanship.
Yeah, it's real good. I mean, I think the thing that is nice about our podcast is like you can just look at all of this stuff we've covered, and if you're like, there's just one that's interesting to you, you can just click on that one and see if you're into it. You don't have to start from episode 1. I don't recommend it, actually.
Well, that was back at the time when we had more than 1 inch for racism, right? When we started the podcast,
we had 2 inches.
Yeah, that was
2 inches available.
There was way too many inches for racism on the podcast at the beginning.
It was a different time.
It was an innocent era of inches on board for racism. But
you didn't know what you were becoming.
I do have some feedback that a fellow Babylon 5 podcast did in recent times. I did a nice Twitter thing, was like, here, check out all these podcasts. I like them. And I tagged our good friends at the last best Babylon 5 podcast. And they messaged me being like, oh, I'm going to check these guys out. But I thought, I honestly thought with the name Continuum Drag that they were like a sci-fi drag podcast. And I'm really disappointed that they're not.
Hey, you can't see us when we're on the podcast.
So
yeah,
these are
picture us however you want. Pictures however you want.
Although I would like the sci-fi drag commentary on Raybots. But you can find us on all those social medias. We're on them and we're posting our stuff as usual. You can email us like a good pal Nick did at yumyumpod@gmail.com. We are on all of the podcast catchers as well. We are also on YouTube, as you guys are as well. Like some people like to know if there's a YouTube, because some people do like to listen on YouTube. So we are on there. Subscribe to that. Yeah, I know. Heathens. But I would also appreciate it if you obviously check these guys out, but make sure to give us both loving, glowing yum yum reviews. We don't accept yum reviews. Okay, that's the difference. We don't accept half yums. We want 5-star reviews saying how lovely and sexy and wonderful we all are and what a great time you've had. It would be very much appreciated.
Which ape kiss do you want to see most?
Yeah, which ape kiss do you want to see the most? All of this will be in the description of the episode. You can support us on Patreon, in which we talk about the Star Trek movies, we talk about the best and worst rated episodes of Star Trek, and we just give our general opinions on other things, other TV shows, other movies, games, podcasts, whatever it is. You can support us on there. Patreon, just look for YumYumPodcast. Man, I'm so happy that we got through Mind War. I was worried that we would lose the Mind War and we would all die and we've all become all over the place. Thank you guys for coming on and becoming with us.
Thanks
becoming
for having
all
us.
over the place. It was such a pleasure.
It was a lot of fun.
Rachel, we end the show with the iconic line that Jakar said in the pilot movie to let us know that he's a sci-fi alien. Good eating to you, Rachel.
Good eating to you.
That's his goodbye. Yeah. That's his goodbye statement in the pilot movie. He says, good eating to you, Commander.
Yeah, I'm down. I'm into it. I like that.
Mystic